All right, everybody. We are here for episode 4 of the Student Venture Series podcast. This is a really special one because we are finally able to introduce some of the mentors that make the UMKC Block School and the Regnier Institute so special. My name's Sam Kulikov, and I'm with Social Apex Media. And today I'm here with Lee Walter, one of the head mentors here at the UMKC Block. And we're going to talk a lot about where he comes from, what his experiences have looked like that have shaped his career, and how that, really integrates into what they've built at this mentorship program at UMKC. So, Lee, thank you so much for joining me. Really
Sam,
appreciate it.
Sam, thanks for being here and thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, let's start out. Just tell me a little bit about, where your background comes from. I know you do a lot of different awesome things. So maybe tell me where everything starts.
Sure, sure. So I'm a native of Kansas City. Grew up sort of in the Brookside Plaza area, and decided I really wanted to get out of Kansas City for college. So I went as far away as I could into New England, about 3 hours north of Austin. Um, for it was a great experience, but I also knew I always wanted to come back to Kansas City because I love Kansas City. And did that and have had a variety of jobs here in Kansas City, but they've all followed through the path of sales, right? And sales is probably the closest thing, or perhaps is entrepreneurship without necessarily starting your own business,
Mm.
right? You're perpetually trying to figure out, how do I solve the problem that a customer has with the product I'm representing? And I've sold all sorts of different things over the years. Started out in high school. My first real job on the plaza was working in a very expensive chocolate shop, more expensive than Andre's at the time.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, even to this day, I'm still like, wow. And one weekend, I was back, and it was Valentine's Day weekend, and I ended up selling $7,000 worth of chocolate in one day. It was the single largest day the store had ever had. And they asked me, well, how did you do this? And I was like, I just kept asking, well, what else do you need? Have you gotten everything for everybody? Do you have,
Mm.
you know, a wife, a daughter, a secretary, right? And that sort of began the process. Um, I've always liked selling. Other things that I sold, uh, you know, lockers for schools at one point. At that time, got the single largest order they'd ever done. It was about $250,000. This was, decades ago. Small business, watched the ownership transformation, understood operations. From there, went to an organization that was the great grandfather of KC SourceLink,
Mm.
same 4747 Troost, and worked with about 40 different startups of different sizes to compress my learning. So from technology to food,
Mm.
everything else. From there, I had a brief stint in investment banking, which was like getting my MBA for the third time. And before that, actually went to work for one of the clients, which was a software company. Um, Spent some time in the coffee bean industry, and then transitioned for about a decade working for a multi-billion-dollar Swiss company that was in the business of selling and distributing commercial espresso machines.
Mm.
Clients included Whole Foods, McDonald's, that sort of thing, and ended my career there with getting into the convenience store industry and closing an $8.5 million piece of business.
Yeah, well, it sounds like, it's a very entrepreneurial, right? Whether you were starting your own business or not, you kind of pick and choose and go on a lot of different journeys. It sounds very, very much so like comparable to an entrepreneurial movement.
Well, I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm curious. One of the funniest stories I like to tell people when they say, "Well, what do you mean you're curious?" I go, "Well, one time I was flying back from Seattle, and struck up a conversation with the guy sitting next to me, who happened to be the head of sales for the Washington Apple Board. Proceeded to ask him questions for 2+ hours about apples. I can tell you more about apples than anybody not in the Apple industry.
I'm sure the people behind you are
Sure,
like, oh, what is
what is
going on?
going on? How do you grade them? What do
Yeah.
you do with them? Where do they go? What about these? The ones we see in the grocery stores are the supermodels of apples,
Yeah.
believe it or not.
No, I know,
Right.
and I think that's a really, important thing. I know we've gotten a chance to know each other over the last year or so, and I think one of the things that you continue to talk about is that curiosity element, and I think that, alongside passion, curiosity tends to be one of the, signifying elements of a great entrepreneur, right? That unending curious kind of mentality. What can you tell me about, like, your experience as a mentor here in UMKC? How do you help students maintain that level of curiosity? Because I feel a lot of times people stray from that and they focus too much on some of the tangibles versus the curiosity, the things that are true to them. Like, how do you make sure that the students you're mentoring really focus in on what makes them great?
Sam, that's a great question. And I think probably one of the things that I try to do is without without poo-pooing an idea. I'm not smart enough to know if, an idea is a good idea or a bad idea, right? Somebody showed up to me and I had $100 million and said, "Hey, want to put $1 million in Uber?" I would say no 100 times out of 100.
Mhm.
It's, I mean, I get it, but I'm like, That's not a business, right?" And obviously I'd be wrong. But keeping up the curiosity piece is, what else don't you know,
Mm.
right? Looking at it deeper. One of the one of the opportunities that that I think the block school is really different from most schools, and particularly the Regnier Institute, is you come in and you get some surface things, but there's faculty here, there are mentors here, there's students here, graduate and undergraduate, that are saying, well, let's pull back that layer, right? Let's pull back that layer, right? So it's not just, well, I'm going to sell it to um, you know, moms,
Mm.
right? Or I'm just going to sell it to seniors. We're going to figure out, we're going to sell it to seniors that have this problem or this problem or this challenge, or we're overcoming this thing,
Mhm.
right? To really, really try to focus down and say, what problem does this solve, and who's the audience
Mhm.
that you want to reach? Which I think is, when you're starting a business, when you have an idea, lots of people tend to fall in love with the ideas, right?
Yeah.
And and the rubber meets the road at execution. And execution means figuring out who's that first customer.
Mm.
And then you got to figure out who the second one is. And then you go, okay, well, these kind of look the same. Can we get to 10?
Mm.
Right. And then you figure out 10 and you go, well, all right, well, there aren't 10 customers that look like this anymore. So we got to find another 10. And you begin to figure out who's buying. But then you've got to go back. And this is the part that's really hard, because you've got to go back and say, why did you buy this?
Mm.
Right? Somebody buying something as a favor is nice, but it doesn't say you've got a business,
Mhm.
right? Um, I'm a firm believer in, if I can solve your problem, you'll pay me the value,
Uh-huh.
right? But if our relationship, if our transactional relationship, our business relationship relies on a personal relationship,
Yeah.
then I've got to spend all of my time making sure you're not upset.
Yeah.
And that is not a good foundation for business relationship.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really great point because I think a lot of entrepreneurs that start out always look to their friends and family to support what they're doing, and they oftentimes can feel somewhat curbed when they don't. And I often try and tell people, like, you don't want your friends and family to like, they're not your key customer usually. So it's like that's just them helping you out. Like, you don't. And so I think what's really interesting about what you said is the peeling back kind of concept. So I'd like to dig into that because I think a lot of entrepreneurs start out with a curiosity to solve a problem. But I think that that is the surfacial level of curiosity. And then there's another level where it's not it because a lot of times you're curious about the idea, but then you're stubborn in regards to why is this product not work? And so then they lose the curiosity when it comes to refining the product and making it great. What can you say about like pushing past that level, right? Because it's one thing to be, oh, I'm interested in healthcare. I'm curious about it. But then it's like your product doesn't work. So you need to be curious about, why it's not working. But a lot of people don't want to confront that, right?
Yeah, that's really hard, and I'll just say that that is a challenge for, solo entrepreneurs who are starting,
Mm.
people who are growing a business. I also assure you, it is a huge problem for large corporations.
So yeah.
Um, not to be too tangential, but I remember a conversation I had with the CEO of the business unit that I used to work for, who was based out of Switzerland, who didn't understand why we needed to change something, and Dunkin' Donuts wouldn't change what they were doing to accommodate our product.
Hmm.
Did not understand why they weren't buying.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, because it doesn't meet their need,
Yeah.
right? And so what you really got to do, I mean, on the curiosity thing is, and I know Sam, you've done this with what you do over at Apex, is understanding what they want, right? Understanding, you know, the why. And some of that, particularly with young entrepreneurs, but really with everybody who's stepping into a new environment, I believe it falls down to not knowing what question to ask or questions to ask, sort of not knowing what to say, if you will, right? And then the other one is feeling like it's okay to ask that question, right? Because they don't want to necessarily hear the bad news, right? So they hear this thing like, what
Right.
if they say, right? What if well, what if they say my baby's ugly,
Yeah.
right? That's we're gonna use that one because we're gonna have babies, right? What am I gonna do if they say my baby's ugly? Well, you're gonna move on,
Yeah.
right? Because it is. Now, if you're trying to turn your baby into a model and you go to 100 agencies and they'll say your baby's ugly, maybe your baby isn't a model,
Yeah.
right? You've got enough feedback that maybe we need to look for something else.
Mhm.
Um, but you also need to have that honest feedback because if everybody tells you, "Oh my gosh, this thing is great," and you bet the farm
Right.
and you find out, yeah, no, it doesn't
Yeah.
work.
I think there's so much to be said about like those initial, it's like the students, I had a conversation with one of the students here and, he was expressing to me, how he wanted to make sure he didn't fail too much and he wanted to take a lot of lessons. And what I tried to explain was like curiosity and failure often go hand in hand. And like you want to learn fast, so then you need to fail fast. It's not about failing less, it's about failing quickly and failing as many times as you can. I think something that helped me really on my journey was, every day that my dad dropped me off at school since I was a young boy, like he would always say, make sure you ask a good question today. And I think like not even in doing it with intent, he was teaching me that like curiosity is the bedrock of moving forward because you should always be asking questions about what you're learning, where you're getting it from, where it's going, and the importance of it. And so I think that's like really interesting to think about where like asking questions inherently leads to failure and success. But because when you ask a question, you'll know if you're failing or not versus keeping your eyes shut and saying, oh no, the MVP's fine. Like
Right.
we're just not selling it because they don't get it. It's like, well,
Right.
but you're
Yeah,
trying to
exactly.
sell the product. So
Right.
you're trying to
Sell the
sell.
product,
And so
right.
if it's not selling,
Right.
it doesn't matter if they don't get it or not.
Right.
They're not, it's not selling.
Right. I'm aware of a product, and I won't name names. I'm aware of a product that when marketing went back to the engineers and said, "People are not enjoying the user experience," the response from the engineers was, "Well, then they're just not smart enough to use our product."
Right.
Right? Huh. Yeah.
Interesting.
Regardless to say the product did not succeed,
Right.
right? And it was millions of dollars down the drain. But I mean, but to your point about questions and failure, yes. And for those of us that grew up without either being challenged or not not necessarily having that failure, if you will, and understanding how to bounce back, it can be hard. But one of the things that I think is really great about the block school, and particularly Regnier Institute, is
Mhm.
it is a very safe space to fail.
Yes.
It is almost encouraged,
Yes.
right? Because every mentor that you run into, every successful entrepreneur you run into, every salesperson you run into, every person in ops, every person that's written code, in all aspects will tell you, oh yeah, I've learned way more from my failures than I did from my successes.
Yeah, because when you succeed, you don't know what necessarily contributed to the success. But when you fail, you almost always can know if you're measuring why it wasn't successful. Because when you're successful, you're like, yeah, I just made a great product. It's like, well, it may have just been market conditions.
Right.
It may have just been luck. And when you fail, you're forced to like reconcile with those things. And I think what's really interesting about what you said is like the thing that they built here at UMKC is, and a lot of times I know we talk about this with mentees, is it's not necessarily the business you're building today here. It's the fact that they've built a sandbox for failure and experience.
Right.
Like that's the most, I think, interesting part about what they've built here at Rainier is like it's the mentors, it's the structure. And so one of the things that I'm curious to hear from you is like, when you interact with students here and you interact with the faculty here and the staff, like how do you go about making sure that you're encouraging failure? Because I think inherently that's a very difficult it's hard for to grasp in a scholastic setting, right? Because everything's about A's and B's and C's and D's, and so failure inherently you connect it to like an F. But
Right.
it's like, no, failure could be an A for
Right.
school. But how do you reconcile that with mentees and students?
Um, so good or bad, right or wrong, I've gotten the reputation as being the tough love guy. Um, and that is not something that I tried to um, develop, but I care enough about the students that I interact with that I tend to tell them the truth. Um, and because everybody has a finite amount of time, I tend to be pretty direct about it. Um, and you know, and if you ask, I can explain why. I think that is the position. Um, but what I've seen happen is if you can get that feedback early on, you tend to be much more successful in the end. Because what matters, the cool thing about learning, particularly in an academic environment, is that, you know, it's about the learning, right?
Right.
It's not, I mean, sure, it's about the grades, but it's about the learning. And, if you're willing to go talk to, the professors, and I know, probably half a dozen of them here in the Regnier Institute, go with them and say, "Hey, look, here's all the stuff I learned." They're gonna be like, "Wow, okay. Yeah, you learned a lot in this class." Okay, hey, assuming you also make your deadlines,
Yeah.
right? You don't make your deadlines, that's a problem.
Yeah, because you still have to
'Cause
ship. Even if the product sucks in real life,
you
you still
still
gotta
to ship,
ship.
still gotta ship, you gotta, you still gotta eat your broccoli, man.
Yeah.
You've got to do that. But they want you to learn and they want you to be successful. And because it is a learning environment, one of the themes, here is whatever you do next is going to be better,
Mhm.
right? As a business person, as a business leader of the community, I'm looking, to find the people that have the skills, right? That I'm not, they're showing up and I got to spend 2 years training them on how to think analytically, how to make a presentation,
Mhm.
how to write a cohesive, slide deck that gets a point across in,
Stuff that
eight,
seems dumb during
right,
school.
right. The stuff in school, you're like, what?
I needed to learn how to write emails? Like,
Right.
come on. It's like, yeah, no, you do.
You do, and by the way, even at my stage in the career, I'm constantly looking and rewriting and saying,
100%.
"Okay, can I do this better? How can I do this differently?"
100%.
And I'm just, curious about all sorts of things.
One of the things that I think is really hard, speaking from experience, like when I was building my businesses, before I exited college here, I was working on some nonprofit initiatives and different ideas during when I was an e-scholar with Brian Boots and Phil Goncher. And, I feel that one of the challenges is that you attach yourself to this identity of that brand. And so that's what makes it challenging to be a pivotal person. But it's hard to teach that to people where it's like, yes, you can love this core concept, but you always have to stay pivotal. Amazon
Yeah.
was a bookstore.
Right.
Instagram was like a check-in app,
Right.
right? All these businesses that became these mega giants and even not mega giants, just like, mid-levels, big, decent sized businesses,
Right.
they all pivoted from their initial concept. So I think the challenge is when you're young, your identity gets attached to the concepts you're building.
It does.
And so that's where I think that fragmentation is hard of like, hey, fail, and this might not be the idea, but like, no, but this is who I am. It's like, yeah, at the core, but you may do it in a different way,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that's what's an interesting concept because you get not only that, but in social media's day and age, young people are just fiending for identity and for purpose and for a differentiator, and they find that in their business. And so I wonder what you have to think about that in regards to like how they can grapple with their changing and liquid identity and understanding that there's a fluidity to who they are, just like there's a fluidity to their business.
Yeah. Yeah. What I guess probably the biggest thing, and again, going back to the learning environment, is, and Sam, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. 'Cause I know you've done some different things in your businesses. Is when you start a business, when you start an idea, you are the product designer, you're the accountant, you are the shipping clerk,
The Jan.
you're the janitor, you're the programmer, you're the salesperson, you're the marketing department, you're everything. And I have yet to meet anyone who is excellent at all of that,
Yeah.
right? And what, I would probably say is, as time goes on and whether it's, this thing and you start your own business and you do it forever, or if, you learn some stuff and then you take entrepreneurship into a small business or a large corporate environment and say, all right, I'm going to try to figure out how to solve some problems that I see exist. I, I think the biggest thing that you can come out of that is having a broad understanding of what the rules are,
Mm.
figuring out what is the like the one or two things in that list that you really excel at,
Yeah.
and then figure out how to bring the other resources along,
Yeah.
right? When you start a business, you're not only selling the product, you're selling the company, right? You're helping you're trying to get whoever you're talking to imagine what this organization looks like and what the future state of the world looks like with this solution
Mhm.
implemented,
Yeah.
right? Which means you've got to be able to tell a really good story.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that that kind of goes back to the identity piece because I feel that, when I first started out, there's this certain rigidity when it comes to trying to put yourself into a box that like, oh, I am good at this and I am good at coding and this and this. And you realize it's like, no, you're good at a lot of these different things and there's not necessarily a word for it. You just fit yourself where you are. And
Right.
you want to and you're trying to like box yourself in and like for me, I didn't grow up thinking that I would own and operate a sports team by any means, right?
No,
Like, and I didn't think twice about it when we started it, but it
right.
was just like, oh, I think my skills could apply here. I didn't look at it as like I am going to be a marketing executive it was just like, let's do it and just go fast and break shit.
Yeah.
And like, how do we make this happen?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's unusual. I'll share, people say, so what about you? And I tell people, I'm a salesperson. That makes people, really nervous,
Yeah.
sales leader. But ultimately, where I fall in is, I'm really good topsoil,
Mm,
right? I'm
mhm.
about 4 inches deep and really wide. And I know the people that have the depth, and I will tell you as we're talking, like, okay, I'm at the end of my depth, but let's see if we can find somebody who can really help
Right.
on this topic,
Mhm.
right? And I can find, on this topic and on this topic. And I got to be really good topsoil going back to where we started, which is curiosity,
Mhm.
right? Because I am curious about all sorts of things, all sorts of, I mean, the world I find fascinating.
And by the way, being an objective, curious person is a skill,
Yes.
right? And like students don't know that it's like, yeah, being a good critical thinker is a skill,
Yes.
but it's not a job title,
No.
but it is a skill.
It is a skill. It is a skill, and you end up in interesting conversations,
Mhm.
and you end up in interesting rooms, and you end up having conversations, with people that, they don't necessarily wanna hear what you have to say, but they search you out
Yeah.
because, they know that they're gonna get a different perspective.
Yeah. Oh,
Um
I know that's fair. I think that's super profound.
and in coming here in Kansas City, whether you're from Kansas City or not, Kansas City is a very, right or wrong, is a very kind city. And one of the secrets about Kansas City, and I'm going to say it here, is that you can talk to anybody in this city. You can get a meeting with anyone. You want a meeting with the mayor, you can get a meeting with the mayor for 20 minutes. It might be in 5 months, and it might be at 7 o'clock in the morning, but you can get a face-to-face meeting with the mayor for 20 minutes if you say, "Hey, I'm a student," and then you ask for the meeting
Yep.
with, a 2 bullet point
Intent. Yep.
agenda.
Yeah. With
That's
intent.
that's it.
Yeah.
That's all you need. You will get that meeting.
Yeah.
I promise you that there is no other city in America the size of Kansas City that you can do that.
Oh, and also one that's growing. And I think what's really important is pulling it all the way back to like the initial point around curiosity, because one of the things that, I practice radical candor at our business. And it's the same way I operate with the mentees as well, because I feel like cutting through the BS is really helpful. And one of the main things I tell them that I do think comes back to the curiosity element, which is you and I and us, we're not smart enough to know who or what is going to make us successful. All we know is to continue to ask questions and to iterate. And to that point, getting into a room with a bunch of people that you don't necessarily know how you're going to extract value from, that's not your position to dictate. Like you, and this is a humbling thing. Like I'm not smart enough to know what conversations are going to change my life.
Right.
And I should be humbled by that. And so I should let my curiosity and my imagination compass, like Leslie says, to really drive me towards things that are interesting to me. And that's
Right.
why I think having an ethos of like, hey, I need to be curious, passionate, and love what I do. And that's almost the most important part and be very iterative. So
Yeah.
I think as we kind of, close out today, I'd love to get your perspective on just like any, parting words or things that you would share with people that are going through UMKC or are in high school and looking at a college. Like, what would you share with them about trying to be an entrepreneur, but also leveraging the scholastic framework that's been set up here?
So I'll share a quick story. I didn't take art history until second semester my senior year of college. That might be one of my greatest regrets in my college career. I loved art history. I wouldn't have been an art history major, but I loved art history. I wish I had gotten a whole lot more art history. So going back to the curiosity theme, take some stuff, take some classes that are outside of your major,
Hmm.
take some classes that are outside of something that you feel is going to be comfortable, right? 5 years from now, nobody's going to ask about your GPA, right? Nobody's going to ask, and if you take, Russian for a semester and the Cyrillic alphabet and you just don't jam, right? And you end up with a C minus, just explain it, right? Yeah, my GPA is terrible, is bad. And I got the C minus in Russian because thought I'd try it and Cyrillic alphabet and I just did not mesh,
Yeah.
right? And someone will go, oh, okay,
Yep.
right? Got it. Got it. Got it. So I would say be really curious, um, and do the work. But when you've got an opportunity to stretch yourself, whether that is be a group leader, whether that is, put together a presentation, make a presentation in front of the class, um, anything that revolves around organizing your thoughts and organizing a cohesive argument, do those things. I know that public speaking is a huge fear of people. Um, I don't know if I overcame it young or somebody gave me some tips and I just ingrained them, but I'll stand in front of a group if you give me, say, what are we talking about? And give me 10 minutes, I'll stand in front of a group and lather on for a while. Um, so those are sort of my things on that. But come to the block school. This is about they want you to be successful, but they want you to be successful in learning, with the idea really being, maybe this thing works out, maybe it doesn't, but the next thing is going to be really good.
No, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing some of your insights. I know I'm looking forward to working on a bunch of different cool student ventures this year and beyond. And just appreciate you. I was in the e-scholars program, but the mentorship program, as it is now, has evolved so much since I was here. And it's really gratifying for me to come back and to see the network that they've built for students to be successful, because it really is the personal relationships that add on that extra layer of potential for these students. So thanks for joining me today, and appreciate your time, man.
Well, Sam, it was my pleasure, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. This was episode 4. We're gonna have much more coming the rest of the year. Big shout out to UMKC Block School and the Regnier Institute for letting us put this on, and of course for our presenting partner in Startland News and the team at Social Apex for making this happen. Thanks so much.